Thank you all for joining us for the 2022 SICSS-Howard Mathematica Keynote Address. It has become a tradition that we do a long-form fireside chat with a world-changing academic during these sessions. We began with Timnit Gebru in 2021 and will continue that tradition in 2022 with Dr. Safiya Noble. Our time together will meander through a few notable areas in her origin story: past, current, and future research, policy, big tech, misinformation, Twitter, Rashad Robinson and Elon Musk, just tech, and we'll end with her sharing the story of her path to the professoriate. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Safiya Noble. Dr. Safiya U. Noble is an Internet Studies scholar and professor of gender studies and African American studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she serves as the co-founder and co-director of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. She holds affiliations in the School of Education and Information Studies and is a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, where she is a commissioner on the Oxford Commission on AI and Good Governance. In 2021, she was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, also known as the Genius Award, for her groundbreaking work on algorithmic discrimination, which prompted her founding of a nonprofit, Equity Engine, to accelerate investment in companies, education, and networks driven by women of color. She is the author of a best-selling book on racist and sexist algorithmic bias in commercial search engines entitled Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, which has been widely reviewed in scholarly and popular publications. She is the recipient of a Hellman Fellowship and the UCLA Early Career Award. In 2022, she was recognized as the inaugural NAACP-Archewell Digital Civil Rights Award recipient. Her academic research focuses on the internet and its impact on society. Her work is both sociological and interdisciplinary, marking the ways that digital media intersects with issues of race, gender, culture, power, and technology. She is regularly sought out for her expertise on issues of algorithmic discrimination and technology bias by national and international press, including The Guardian, the BBC, CNN International, USA Today, Wired, Time, Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, The New York Times, and a host of network news and podcasts. Her popular writing includes critiques on the loss of public goods to big tech companies, as featured in Noma magazine. Safiya is the co-editor of 2 edited volumes, The Intersectional Internet, Race, Sex, Culture, and Class Online, and Emotions, Technology, and Design. She is a member of several academic journal and advisory boards, and holds a Ph.D. and MS in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a BA in Sociology from California State University, Fresno, where she was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2018. In 2020, she was awarded the Distinguished Alumna Award from the iSchool Alumni Association and is also the inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Award winner from the Illinois Alumni Association at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Noble is a board member of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, serving those vulnerable to online harassment. She was recently appointed as a board member for the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, America's Black think tank. She is also working with the Social Science Research Council on the Just Tech Platform and Fellowship, which we will ask her about later. I don't know about you, but around the end of someone reading my bio, I start to get a little antsy. I wonder if the crowd is like, wow, this is really long. But when they get to the end, and I feel really proud about my accomplishments and appreciate that this person has shared a bit about me with the world. And I am excited about getting to share you with the world. Then I get a little anxious and I'm excited to jump in. But sadly, we're not jumping in yet because I want to start by reminding you how you and I met.
Okay.
And I'm going to get a little sappy because you're literally one of my academic heroes. I saw you speak live at Berkeley in the Bonato Auditorium in Sudarjati Hall in 2019. It was about 6:30 p.m. on a March Monday. Thanks to Google, I know when that was. One of my funders, Citrus Policy Lab, hosted you. I have to tell you that there's a certain way that you present that I find both brilliant and exceptionally accessible. And it was one of those moments where you come face to face with an academic that you want to be like. You drop like serious knowledge and also care that we're taking the ride with you, the people in the audience. And when I heard you speak, beyond immediately noting your grasp of the zeitgeist and your obvious brilliance and charisma, I was just personally touched by your story. I'm an older PhD student and found out that you had also a non-traditional path to your PhD as well. And after your talk, I patiently waited amongst all the other adoring academic fans to chat with you, to set the stage for everyone out there in the virtual world. There was like a line of people to the point where you thought people might have Safiya Noble jerseys or want her to sign like a badass academic trading card. If nobody has those, I need to get on the ground floor.
That's
of those,
a cool
okay?
idea. I'm
Right?
into that. I
We
would
should go on
collect those.
Shark Tank, you
We
know?
really should.
So you had a crowd at the time. I just wanted to say hi and thanks. This is one of those moments where I thought you shone light on a lot of us in the room. And I thought I'd lost my chance to talk to you because the organizer shut the lights off and kicked us out the room. But you sat down outside and held court until all of us had a chance to talk to you. And I carry to this day with me the advice that you gave me about the importance of being who you are and owning the place that you're in and the path and the miles behind you as much as you get excited about the ones that are in front of you, especially for those of us who are older who start this. So I digress. I should let you actually talk about you, but I just wanted to give you your flowers now on behalf of so many of us out here who admire you.
Oh, that is just the kindest thing to say. And I really appreciate it. I do remember that day. And, you know, I always feel so honored that, first of all, that anybody is interested in what I have to say, because I know so many of us go through life not always feeling that what we have to say matters. Mm-hmm. And I have certainly felt that at different times in my life. And so that you stayed to have a conversation, and there were a lot of people there, meant a lot to me. And I feel like anybody who stays to speak, I'll stay to speak too. You know, that's really important for us to see each other, and that's what we're here for too. And look where it's led us. Now I get to be here in this conversation with you.
This is so exciting.
So
I'm so geeking out right now. It's going to come out eventually. I might start giggling. But before I do, maybe we should jump in and I'll ask you a few questions and we'll see where it goes.
Go for it.
So with the idea of brilliance and accessibility, can you maybe start by giving our listeners a sense of what you do? And we're not going to take for granted, but people know. And how you got here. Go as far back as you like. I feel like origin stories matter. So let's first talk about the origin story of Safiya Noble.
Okay, this is so, wow. It's been a long journey from the beginning to here. I grew up I thought I grew up in a kind of small town. By California standards, let's say any city that isn't LA or the Bay is considered a small town when you grow up in California. But I grew up in a place called Fresno, California, which is dead smack in the middle of the state. It's a kind of mostly a college town and a farming community. And it's a tough, rough place to be from, in the sense that I learned at a very young age a lot about space and place, like where Black people can go and where we can't go. And you know, I'm from the 70s, like I grew up in the 70s as a child. And so like seriously Gen X. And there weren't a lot of people like me. You know, my mom was white, my dad was Black, my parents weren't married. It seemed like I was part of that generation who's, everybody whose parents were married, they all got divorced in the 80s. As a latchkey kid, just like all the things just about it being kind of like free range parented. So I kind of grew up fast and learned a lot about the limits, because that's a kind of place that doesn't feel like full of possibility, which is what I feel about places like New York, you know, where you're from, and like LA. I always like envied people who are from those big cities where it was like, you just like look up at a beautiful big building or look out at a skyline and just envision yourself being amazing. I mean, I'm
not from the cool part of New York. Thank you for that though. I'm from Long Island. There are no big buildings. I mean, I guess there's possibility, but you know, it's not.
You're like, oh, is this
Bronx or Brooklyn or something, you know. Strip malls came out of my hometown.
You're shocking. All right. It's one of those kind of places. Um, and, you know, I went to college in my hometown. I went to Fresno State because both my parents became disabled when I was coming of age as an adult. And that was really hard. It's really hard. You know, I actually applied to and got into Howard, and that was my dream school,
Oh
was
my
to go to
gosh.
Howard, me and my best friend. And of course, we couldn't afford it because we were working class kids. So we didn't get to go. We didn't have enough financial aid to go to Howard. And so, again, this makes this extra special for me. And, you know, I went to Fresno State and I did all the things like most people my age, I think, you know, are just like, God, if we could just get a job, you know, if we could just, I don't know, like pay the rent, you know, make a life, not have to live with our parents, you know, all those kinds of things. And, you know, I got into professionally, I got started off in like corporate social responsibility, which was really a kind of like an emerging big thing in the 90s. Where big companies were trying to figure out how to be both socially responsible to the communities and consumers that use their products and services, but also like figure out how to divest themselves of things like sweatshops where children were making their clothes, like, or their shoes. These are like the Nikes and the Liz Claibornes of the world. And you know, I did that kind of work with companies. You know, I worked on strategy for companies like Ben and Jerry's or Patagonia, you know, Bath and Body Works, all those shops that were considered in the 90s to be like the socially responsible businesses. So, you know, that was how my career started. And I was always thinking, because I grew up again in a place like Fresno, where it felt like a place that was abandoned, where communities of color were abandoned, where Black people didn't have grocery stores on, you know, the West Side. And like, if we could just convince companies to be more responsible and responsive, you know, our lives would be better. And, you know, that was probably like a naive way of thinking about the world when I was 23 or 24 years old. But I did think it was kind of completely jacked up that working class people didn't have goods and services that rich people had in my town. And that led me to working in advertising. I worked in multicultural advertising and marketing for like 15 years. I did all that kind of work. And I would do things like specifically create opportunities in Black communities, mostly with companies. And some of that was like supporting entrepreneurship. Some of that was like corporate philanthropy. And, you know, I started out, like, one of the things I started doing was funding community technology centers in the 90s and the early aughts, which this was before people really had the internet at home. You know, this was just kind of becoming a thing. And I had the internet at home early because my mom was a graphic designer. And, you know, we had like she and her best friend bought the two first Apple computers, like Macintosh computers, because they were graphic designers. And they were using like Quark Express and like laying out magazines. She used to work on those big giant typesetting machines. And then she went to desktop publishing. She was one of the first people. So I was around computing really early, like 16 or 17, and in the 80s. And so that was like an interesting, you know, part of the like backstory that I don't really talk about that much. But here she was, this woman who was, you know, into computers and was trying to get me into computers, which I wanted to have nothing to do with, because it seemed like nothing could be more boring to me than sitting at a computer all day and typing. I was just like, why would anyone want to do that? And yet here we are. That's what I do for a living. As like a writer and a professor. So I don't know, like, that's like, to me, like an important, I don't really ever talk about that. Usually when I talk about my origin story, I kind of like pick it up with starting in advertising professionally. But truthfully, I'm sure it was like watching my mom work 2 or 3 jobs while I was a latchkey kid trying to get on her feet and trying to be an entrepreneur, and just so that she didn't have to deal with like classic like 9 to 5 kind of scenarios that women in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s dealt with, which was making half the wages of their male counterparts, training men on the job to do what they did, to watch them become their bosses, you know, all these kinds of things that women in the workforce experience. And she wanted to be free. And she put that in me to want to be free too. And that is in me all the way, for sure. That's a big motivating value for me.
Where do you think she found that drive? Because it sounds like it would have been unusual for that time period for someone. I mean, vision runs in the family, and creativity and brilliance. It sounds. Where do you think she got that drive from? Was it giving to you, the next generation, or was it something else?
Well, my mom, my mom was married right out of high school to my brother and sister's dad at 18. She was in Mensa in her high school, which for people who don't know, that is the genius, it's like the real genius people.
So you're the second genius.
Yeah, but I'm not that kind of genius.
You are the second
like
genius
real
in your
geniuses.
family.
I'm like a thank you for calling me that, but like she was like a legit like take a test and be a genius type of person.
Wow.
My dad was also equally brilliant. He was also kind of that genius level person. I don't talk about him very much usually publicly, but my dad had been obviously drafted into the military during Vietnam. And they make you take a test when you're drafted to determine like all kinds of things about like whether you'll be an officer or whether you go to college, whether you'll go to the front lines. The people who were legit on paper geniuses went to Europe. They went to Germany. They didn't go to Vietnam, and they became trainers in various types of specializations in the military. So my dad didn't go to Vietnam. Well, of course, he always told us he went to Vietnam, but then we learned at his funeral from my uncle that he did not go to Vietnam. He went to Germany. And so that was always like a running family joke that's like hilarious to us. But he went and did that. And so I think my mom, for her being in Mensa, but my grandfather not allowing her to go to college because women didn't go to college in the 50s. And then, she got married at 18 and started having kids. And, back then in the 60s, women couldn't even have their own bank accounts without their husbands or their fathers signing the documents, right? So every aspect of my mom's life was constricted by the patriarchy, truly. And of course, being in a very difficult marriage and getting divorced in the 60s, which was hugely unpopular. And, that came with a lot of stigma. I think, and then, of course, meeting my father, who was a professional musician, a bit of a Rolling Stone, if you will. So, he was out touring around the world with all of these famous artists. He was a drummer, he's a percussionist. And so he was living his dream. And, in some ways, I think my father was a dreamer who lived his dreams and went for them and didn't have a lot to show for it at the end of his life, but did his life on his own terms. My mother was a dreamer who had her dreams thwarted and didn't get to live out many of her dreams. And so somehow, I think what got put into me was a drive to do things and a real sense of where the limits are and why it's important to push past them.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Wow. I love hearing people's stories. Thank you.
Yeah, you're getting all kinds of things out of me that I'm afraid of where this interview is going to go, because I don't usually talk about these things very much, mostly because I think, our profession, our work doesn't really make space for the whole person.
No.
And people just want to get right to the business of like you, the scholar or something. And
also what you can do for them also.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I've loved these conversations with our different speakers and our founders, because you find out and people love to be real, like I love creating authentic spaces, and I'm thankful that you're joining us in this one.
Yeah, well, you're gifted at doing that.
Oh, so. Thank you. Well, we're going to meander into work now. We'll come back to your origin later, but academic origin. So we'll meander through your work. I'll pose a few questions from our SICSS family. I promise shout outs to people who sent questions, so there will be some shout outs. Right. And we'll finish off our time learning about your path to the professoriate.
Okay.
So can you offer an introduction to your groundbreaking work on algorithmic oppression and its reach into the lives of everyday people?
Well, let me say that breaking that path, was really hard. It's easy to narrate in retrospect, like, oh, you write a path breaking work, but it didn't feel like that while I was writing it, and I'm still often in shock that we've broken so much path, many of us together. Yeah, so that book, Algorithms of Oppression, started out obviously as my PhD dissertation. And at the time, okay, I mentioned I had worked this long career in advertising, and I went back to graduate school during the recession. It was a very difficult time. Many people were reinventing themselves. I was also trying to reinvent myself professionally and personally, and just carving out some space to think by going to graduate school. And I was really surprised because I knew that academia was kind of like always off track with industry. Like there's always just like either a lag or a leapfrog that's happening, one or the other.
I like that.
And
wow.
Yeah, right. It just depends on like kind of what the area is or what the field of study is. And so when I was going to the information school, the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the time at Illinois, at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, everybody was enamored with search engines. And of course, many of us, like I had said, we'd all been on the internet for a very long time. I too had been on the internet, even though I wasn't super into computing. I was definitely not interested in programming, but I had been on the internet since the 80s. And I was so surprised at how people were talking about these companies like Google and Yahoo, Lycos, Alta Vista, all these different kinds of companies.
Oh, you went way back.
Yeah.
Ask Jeeves.
I'm like, yes, even before. I mean, I was on the internet before we had the graphic user interface.
Yeah.
Okay. When it was the text-based internet. So and as I was leaving advertising, of course, we were doing all kinds of things to try to game the system to get our clients, like advertorial about our clients, to show up on the first page of Google and other search engines. So I was so surprised that everyone was talking about search companies, like they were like the New Public Library or like not as advertising companies. There were a handful of scholars who definitely were, Frank Pasquale, Siva Vaidyanathan had just written this amazing book called The Googleization of Everything and Why We Should Worry. That book changed my life because I felt like, oh, he knows what's going on with these things, and that it is kind of worrisome that people are relating to these technologies like a public good when they're not a public good. But there was also something like even more specific that I felt was happening because I was in the multicultural sector and I had worked in urban marketing. And I felt like what was happening in, like, let's say, the Black part of the internet was different than just the generic internet because I was in those parts. And so I wanted to just write a little addition to his book. Like that's how I thought of my
just add a leaf onto the branch. Not a whole damn new tree.
I didn't know that was gonna happen.
Forest, you created a forest.
I was like, everything you're saying, but also there's like actually something that's like a bit more perniciously racist and sexist happening and that we should just add on. And that's what that book really attempted to do, was to just say, like, let me just fill out this conversation a little bit more with like the Black woman perspective on it. And as that book, by the time that book finally came out, as at a dissertation stage in 2012, I was talking like in 2011 and 12 about that algorithms could be racist and sexist. And by the time the book came out in 2018, there was already so much more evidence of that, but it really hadn't been cohered into a narrative. So I just think the book hit at a time that many journalists and more scholars were starting to pay attention. And there was just like a thing that could kind of give voice to this phenomena. And now, of course, every day we're reading horrific headlines of what tech companies and AI and algorithms are doing to destroy society. And so there's so much more evidence now, and there's so many more brilliant scholars like yourself who are doing the important work, that I really just feel like I laid down a little bit of a cornerstone, but everybody else is really building now this field. And it's both heartening and amazing because people are doing such smart work that's so important that will change the world. And it's also really devastating because more and more damage is happening that we are documenting.
So I want to dig in a little bit more to what you mentioned about in the middle of this, it didn't feel like you were sort of, washing in the zeitgeist, Can you talk about that? Because I think there's this belief that there's this moment of brilliance and it's brilliant, it's going to be great. And then it just happens. What was the experience of creating this for you and then watching this just take off?
Okay, so the experience was like, I was trying to defend the dissertation. I knew that algorithms were being encoded with values. I had a very hard time getting 4 people on my dissertation committee to really support that. My advisor, Linda Smith at Illinois, was phenomenal. And she was like, this work is important and it's going to make a difference. And so I never underestimate the power I have as a committee member, for example, in supporting ideas that are ahead of their time, yes. Or when people see something that everyone else can't see. I really understood what those 4 people did and didn't do for me. And I'm really grateful for, the good and the bad of that experience of trying to get this work through. And I, got my first job in African American Studies at Illinois. And first of all, it's very hard to get hired at the university where you do your PhD.
Oh, so yeah.
I wanted to be at Illinois. I was hired in AFAM. My colleagues in African American Studies, they really understood this work as being like very new and innovative in the field of Black studies, and that I was foregrounding Black feminism and, Black studies frameworks. And they valued that because no one was really talking about tech in Black studies either. So I felt like I kind of won the lottery that I got this amazing job in Black studies. But the truth is my colleagues, my peer colleagues, many of them coming out of the information school, they gossiped about me. They were like really mean spirited. They were like, you just threw your whole career away by going into Black studies. Black studies was illegible to people who were in fields like computer science and information science, library science. So that was, something I had to reckon with. Maybe I'm going to be in Black studies my whole career because my core field where I've done my PhD doesn't appreciate this work. But I wasn't disheartened. It was just a thing where, immediately move to outsider status in your field, which already I think I was like the 12th African-American to get a PhD in LIS in my university, and in the 100 years of my university. The person before me was Krista Hardy, Dr. Krista Hardy, who's an amazing librarian and information professional. Before her was Andre Brock. We literally know each other. Do you know what I mean?
Andre Brock is going to be speaking at our conference this summer. I love him.
Andre's
a way of saying things that just cut through.
He's like my brother, from another mother, for sure.
I didn't know you 2 knew each other. Oh, that's amazing. We're doing a panel on equity and ethics in the metaverse. And him and Courtney Cogburn, Kyla McMullen, and who's the last person? Oh, Daniel Olson are going to be on the panel. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, Andre had already been out. He was an assistant professor at Iowa, and he heard I was coming into this PhD program, and he emailed me and he said, I went through this PhD program. I got you. You hit me for anything. And that's how we became, he's one of my closest friends to this day. So, it was like the beginnings of this work and this, my career were very difficult. And then when I went back into information studies, I was recruited to UCLA. And, that was great. I got to come home to California. I was done with the snow. So it was great. And, we moved our family here. And here I was, this Black feminist, critical race theorist, and I think some of my colleagues, did not value that kind of work at all. And so I actually found that I had a very difficult, all the years of being an assistant professor and even up through getting tenure, I had many people in my own department against me. voting against me, not wanting my work to be so visible and attributed back to them in the department because they didn't believe in this kind of work. They felt like, they were not scholars of race. So that was also hard because while this book was like, I was writing it and then it hits and it comes out, I'm in the world giving talks with beautiful people like you, how we met at Berkeley, right? Where I'm having this experience of people receiving me and receiving my work and really appreciating me and making me feel like I've contributed something that matters in the world. And then I'm coming home in my department and I'm having the opposite experience. I'm having the experience of like active career suppression. I feel bullied and silenced. I am many days weeping about how hard it is to be a Black woman in a predominantly white institution. I'm under supported. And that happens all the way through getting tenure. And when I got tenure, it was also difficult. There were like grievances involved and things that, we have to do just to get some modicum of protection in these institutions that are actually not set up for Black women. And they are hostile places for us. So, I think the coup de grace was that I was going up for full professor and about, I don't know, like a year and a half or so ago, 18 months or 2 years, something, I don't even know, the time stopped because of COVID.
Yes.
But I was going up for full professor and I was really worried. I wasn't sure if I was going to get it because of all this like active career challenge that I had faced in the institution. And then the MacArthur hit and that changed everything. And, the thing about that award is that it just catalyzed the change that I needed. So I was able to, for example, move my line into the Department of Gender Studies. I'd always been in African-American studies at UCLA, and that was great. But now I'm in gender studies in AFAM, and I just feel so free. I feel like I can say and do anything with my work, and it's like everyone's cheering for me in the background. My colleagues are just amazing. And it wasn't that I didn't have, I had some amazing colleagues in information studies, but it wasn't enough to really change the dynamics there. And I think a lot of like Gen X professors are also, and millennial professors feel this in academia right now, where there's like a real power struggle between our baby boomer colleagues and ourselves with like relinquishing power, making space for people to participate, like valuing what we have to contribute. Those dynamics I hear from lots and lots and lots of people in academia right now. So I don't think these things are really even specific to me. I think it's kind of like part of the crisis that's happening in higher ed around leadership and transfers of power and those kinds of things. But I will say that, my encouragement to everyone is that if you are going into academia, that we find each other, we support each other. There are a lot of, like, your support sometimes comes laterally. I had amazing colleagues who were like, like holding me up and reminding me that I matter and that my work matters. And, of course, you're part of that. And it's like this ecosystem that we make that is what received my work. So, never get too hung up on like the politics of your department or like those kinds of things that happen in the university, because we make our community all over the world in all kinds of different ways. And the community that has stepped forward and embraced me and embraced my work is actually what has made this book and my career happen 100%. And I will never be able to repay the debt of gratitude that I feel to people I know and don't know who have taken up this work.
I find it so beautiful that when you said you joined gender studies, that you felt free. And that takes me back to what you said about what your mom gave you, that you found that freedom. I'm also, as you're talking, I'm thinking so much of Ruha Benjamin, who, is AFM studies at Princeton, and the beautiful work that you're both doing.
And Ruha has been a person, like, she's one of the people who emerged and was just like, hey girl, I got you, I see you, and I have always been that way for her. And yeah, it's like people who aren't in your department, but who are in the world. And she's been a person who has used her power. She was a full professor before I was, and she used her power to shine a light on me. And I'm so grateful to her for that. And, I think we try to model that and do that for others, as best we can.
And I'm excited a little bit later in our discussion to talk about Just Tech, which is like a league of extraordinary academics, like all of the superheroes, like it's like academics assemble over at Just Tech. Before we get into that, I want to focus in on something you mentioned about programming. So can you talk about being a person in this space who's not a programmer or a coder, and how you're receiving? I gave a talk at a computer science department recently. I gotta tell you, I walked in, I was a little shook. I was like, it was great, it was fine. But can you talk about operating in this tech space, and if that's something you've spent time engaging in, or how you've thought about your contribution? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I worked at an amazing company. At the time, it was called OJC Tech, On the Job Consulting Technologies, and then they changed their name to Pixo Tech, now in Urbana, Illinois. And my job there was basically, I worked like a creative director and a user experience director. And so I would go out and I would test the wireframes for like new websites that we were developing for our clients with people that they thought would be users of their website. So I was this translator between customers or consumers of a site and the programmers who were building it, let's say like in Drupal or something. So I had to be knowledgeable enough to, which is kind of like a role I'd played in account services in advertising between clients and creatives, where I had to like write creative briefs where the creatives could kind of act upon it. But, programmers are like creatives in an ad agency. Yeah. They're artists. That is really how they see their work. I mean, I would sit and listen to them, trash talk on who had more beautiful code than the other.
Beautiful code.
They're like, and then they're like classical guitarists too. And it's like all this like, what? I mean, there's like it is a type of art, and I related to them as artists. And so I had and my parents were artists, obviously.
Oh,
so
really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You said your dad was a musician.
My dad's a musician. My mom is a graphic artist.
Yes.
So I kind of understood the temperament of artists, and I have respect for their work. And so I would, and I also knew the shortcomings. Like artists don't take feedback very well all the time on their art. So I learned that skill of kind of like speaking into how they would hear what was being delivered and trying to speak in ways that would get them to do the things that our clients wanted or that the customers wanted. And that taught me a lot. And I was doing that while I was in graduate school. So that as I was like trying to talk about things like values get encoded into code, I was in my part-time job outside of work trying to talk about that with the programmers. Now, I couldn't really hit them. Even then, I would try out ideas with them and I would say, well, like, the design of this, like, it's privileging white users of the site. And Black users, when they come, cannot find themselves. They can't find the things in this site that's going to be like 5,000 pages for like a huge institution. They can't easily find themselves. The metadata, they can't, when they keyword search on things I know they're going to keyword search on, nothing comes up that's relevant. That's what I mean about how a site can be racist. And they were like super resistant because their training is around like universal user.
Yes.
So this is what had me write in the book about like, let's unpack who the universal user is and how these concepts stemming from the Enlightenment are really about white men, white educated men. Like, so let's unpack it. And that book was like a space to unpack the things I understood about how computer scientists and programmers worked, and trying to like, I was kind of like writing a book of evidence to convince them of what I was trying to explain to them sometimes on the job. I don't think I've ever really described that in any talk. I've never really told anybody that, but that was actually what was happening in real time while I was working on the dissertation and then the book. So that's how I have learned to speak to computer scientists and programmers and engineers. I also expected when the book came out that computer scientists and engineers would eviscerate me. I expected a massive takedown because I had experienced some of the guys I worked with just being like unconvinced. You know, I loved them. I loved working with them, but they were kind of like, not really sure about that. And then, you know, there was this one incident right when the book came out where the historian for IEEE, which is a very big, as you know, engineering organization, professional organization, the biggest, kind of did like a takedown of the book. He read the review, like the description on Amazon. He didn't even read the book. And he tweeted out a bunch of trash talking on this book. Like, this book is like BS because look at what the description from the publisher. And girl, the whole Black academic internet, the whole feminist.
Did Andre bring Black Twitter?
Oh my God. I don't even know where all of these people came from, but they were like, no, you didn't. We're not doing that. And let me tell you what, no, you're not going to not read a book and then take it down because aren't we scholars? And what? And then there were plenty of people who had kind of read, you know, these early versions of it, and they came in. And I think that was really a pivotal moment because the engineers who were watching were kind of like, why don't we read these social scientists before we start dragging them for filth? Because we don't actually want to get taken out like that guy. And maybe like there's a there. And what I saw start happening, like that was a moment where I started to see a space for repair. And I saw them starting to read more people's work, not just mine. And we started actively in academic Twitter, tweeting out all these amazing scholars who were writing about technology, but were social scientists or humanists. And we were like actively communicating at other fields, like in engineering. And I think they were reading. I started seeing it like thousands of downloads into Mountain View of some of my papers that I could track through different library systems. And I was like, oh, maybe this book isn't going to get eviscerated. Maybe there's going to be a space like where people will just be like, let me entertain that. And, you know, they did. So it's important, I think, for me to narrate that it was also engineers having a willingness to listen to social scientists and humanists and community organizers and activists and people who were trying to ring some bells. They listened, a lot of them. Now, maybe not in the C-suite, but line workers who were like working on products. They've been listening, and now they've been listening for several years.
It's so interesting. You're almost like a technological academic polyglot. You like speak all these different languages and are bringing all these things together. And it's so interesting because between the social sciences, even just, you know, with computer science, as just in the IRB space, you know, what needs to be sent to IRB that involves like human interaction. It's two different languages. So the fact that you're able to bridge that is incredible.
Let me add one thing. There were people also in our field. Now, when I say like people, I want to be really specific. The people who were, I think, doing the very crucial work are at the intersection of like race, gender, sexuality, technology, the internet, network technologies, coding. They were almost completely, like with the exception of a few, they were mostly women. Yes. They were mostly women of color. They were mostly LGBTQIA people, journalists, scholars, students, organizers. And we were also, as I mentioned, many people experiencing like active harm in their careers by our white colleagues, right? Or by people who were arguing against us and saying no. And so there were also these like less visible rifts. These are things that students right now actually don't even understand. So there are, you know, you just look out at a field and you're trying to make sense of it. But there were people who, there were factions, just like there always are, like the people who do the race work and people who don't want to do that work, or who like deny the possibilities for that work. And many of those people,
or put it in the last week of the syllabus on the last hour.
Well, they're like, it's like the little token gesture, a token acceptance of a paper at certain conferences, or not even inclusion in those conferences. And so of course, over the last decade, I've watched that happen too, where now there's a whole cottage industry of people doing, like, let's say, ethical AI, right? Like, let's say, as a big tent. And people who denied that work now have somehow leapt to the forefront of that work, right? And of course, they've gotten money and funding. Their centers have gotten a lot of money because funders are really comfortable funding not Black women, not Latinas, not Asian women, not LGBTQ people of color, non-binary people of color. So that's also been hard because these were people who, were more skeptical. And now our work has been undeniable. And, so we're still evolving, these fields. I just think it's important to like make the bumpy, rough, hard patches visible, because it looks smooth. It looks like, oh, you just like, and that's not how that happened. And even still, people get, use in service of like taking down, all these amazing, beautiful scholars of color, or like erasing their work, or they don't see the harshness that's been behind the scenes. And I just think that's a part of academia that I'm really committed to making more transparent, so that people know that, like, oh man, like this is a rough ass career, and it requires community and support and love and repair, because there are also bad actors in the space, and we got to work together. And I feel very fortunate to be contributing, I hope, both as a giver and a receiver of that kind of support, because it's very necessary when you are a woman of color, especially a Black woman working in this field.
It's and it's great because I'm seeing all these different organizations that are building up programs to support that work. So Just Tech, we have very CSS in the computational social science space, which is elevating women and women of color, and our BGLTQ IA brothers and sisters as well. There's a lot of people jumping into the fight. And it's so exciting and beautiful to see.
It's beautiful.
So before we jump into some questions from our SICSS folks, I want to ask you about your dream research list. Is there a data set or a collaboration or something you can imagine but that has not happened yet, either for yourself or as I described to you earlier, green shoots, something that newer academics can just see poking their little heads out, little flowers, in Illinois, we'll use Illinois, before the snow takes them out, their little heads are popping out. What are those things that you're excited about that you see on the horizon?
Well, for me, I'll talk about, because I see so many green shoots everywhere with so many people, your community, this beautiful community that you're generating and like leading us in. And I mean, the work that, Tanit is doing and Joy is doing, and like so many people I could name, Ruha, I mean, I could, you just know everybody is blossoming. Students, I mean, all of the graduate students that I've been so fortunate to be on their committees or to advise or research direct, they're all now assistant professors, and they're blowing up in terms of just like new insights and awareness that'll make the world better. And so that's beautiful to me. So I love all these green shoots that I just see everywhere. For me, I will say that I would like to get back a bit to art in my own, a lot of people don't know this, that I went to.
Are you an artist?
Well, I'll just say, I went to a performing arts magnet high school.
Oh, is it like Fame?
Yes, I actually went to the same one Audra McDonald went to. We were in the same class. And of course, when you are in the same
Audra!
class.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, when you're in the same graduating class with Audra, girl, you are not an artist, because there's only one.
Put your work in perspective.
Exactly. You're like,
it's like she sings. That woman sings. I sing.
You're like, maybe I'm not an artist, because I go to high school with like Whitney Houston. I mean, I don't know, it's like, it's bananas.
Yeah.
But we went to the same high school. And so I went to a performing arts magnet, and I really, really love art, and I love performing. And that's probably been one of the things that like is an intangible that people can't quite put their finger on about me and my work and how I deliver my work. It's partly tied to this like early origin story of performing. And so I would like to work, and I am working on other kinds of translations, artistic translations of my research and of work in our field, so that it can be available to wider audiences. So I dream about, like, my green shoots that I dream about are things that are about these artistic disseminations of research, and that maybe I'll leave it there. But those are my dreams right now. Like, I would love to do that. I'm also an institution builder. I like to build things that will last and that will hold a lot of people. So obviously I've been working with Sarah Roberts and, Dr. Stacey Woods and Vanessa Rhinesmith and Aki Young, and my team at the Center for Critical Internet Inquiry at UCLA, building that research center. And I'm going to be leading a new campus level institute at UCLA that will be highly interdisciplinary. And I like providing like a visionary leadership, so that, again, there's a container for people to do their work and for people to just experience more freedom around their work and resources. So those are kind of the things that I'm working on right now. I'm not sure. I have another book somewhere in here, but I'm not quite ready to spit it out.
Or maybe an album.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. There's
Hollywood, Sundance, anybody want to call?
It's hard. I mean, listen, anybody at me, you know what I'm saying? Get in my DMs. I don't know. Let's talk. So, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about let's jump into some questions from our participants from our different sites. Okay. So last year we had an organization called Data Nutrition join us. They're affiliates of the Berkman Klein Center. Kasia had a few questions for you that have to do with funding. So I'm wondering, and I know you founded a nonprofit. Is it Equity Engine?
Yes.
So they want to know the role of funding, the opportunities or challenges around how to get responsible AI work funded. So what would you say to people who are in that space or thinking about that right now?
Okay, so I think this is a really important moment for kind of responsible AI, justice-oriented technology. There are a lot of funders. All the big funders are funding that. MacArthur, Ford, Omidyar. We've been funded by the Minderoo Foundation, which has been like a really, really helpful to just help us get our center at UCLA going and make it meaningful. So I think there are a lot of funders, and also smaller funders and individuals. There are a lot of individuals who worked in the tech sector and are in varying forms of disgust around what is happening in the world, and who also want to give their money to people who are trying to do repair. So I think even NSF has started to issue calls. Okay, so the whole funding apparatus now is pointed in our direction, and I think that's amazing. I think it's still a bit of a challenge for women and people of color to get those funds, but I don't think it's impossible by any stretch. And I think they're listening, and people should be approaching all the big foundations. They should also be approaching their campuses. At UCLA with this kind of new campus-based institute, I think like they're tapping me to be the first kind of interim director while we do a national search for a permanent director of this institute that's in development. I think that signals that people who have like a racial justice lens are valuable to lead these kinds of interdisciplinary efforts on campuses. And I think people should be pressing their provosts and their campus leadership to fund those kinds of things too, and employ the institution to help. I will say with Equity Engine, it's been interesting because Equity Engine is the nonprofit that I started after receiving the MacArthur Fellowship. And the Equity Engine is really like not specifically tied to the tech sector and repair work, but it is about providing fellowships and support for women who have very big transformative ideas, which I felt I was a person like that who was under supported, who didn't have enough support. So like getting, some wind underneath, good ideas or good technologies or good, not technologies. That has been harder to raise money for, to be honest. And one of the things that I'm kind of learning as I try to raise money there is that, if I'm honest, I think funding women of color when we are completely down and out and don't have anything is something that predominantly white funding organizations tend to do, because it actually reinforces white supremacy, right? I mean, it does. Funding the building of women of color and Black women's power is actually much more threatening, and people are not as interested in funding that. So that has been, again, a wake-up call about the truth of the limits of, what I've been able to do. Of course, I'm still at it, but I just feel like for funders who watch our talk, invest with as many like no strings attached dollars as you can into women of color and into Black women, because we are holding up so many people and so many ideas and so many, like, you wouldn't even believe what we're holding up in our own families, our immediate and extended families. We're holding a lot of people up, and of course our staff and our teams, our students, and we need the resources. And, there are things that I can do in a space like UCLA, in a university, but there are a lot of things I cannot. It's much harder to support like community organizers who are on the front lines of gathering some of the most important data around all kinds of things, the use of AI in predictive policing, in harassing poor people and people experiencing homelessness, and like in hard to reach places that are not inside the neat package of a university. Equity Engine is really the nonprofit to do support for those kinds of people, and it's harder to find resources for people doing that work. So that's just my landscape analysis. Others might have a different experience.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think there's this idea that a large amount of money is all you need to just, but the maintenance of something, once you start this incredible organization. Thank you for giving us a look into what that's like. So we have another funding question. So the role of funding. Actually, no, it's a regulation question. So before we get to regulation, though, before we get to regulation, I want to go back and think a little bit about what the landscape looks like. So thinking about sort of the importance of building ethical, fair, transparent, et cetera, AI has grown over the last few years, but it definitely wasn't always that way. So what would you call the moments or incidents that you felt pushed the field forward over the last few years? Like, what were those incidents or those moments? And then from there, I'd love to talk about regulation with you.
Great. Okay. So I think a very big moment was when Shireen Mitchell and other Black women on the internet saw the Russian interference in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election, and were issuing a warning that social media was being weaponized, and Black people specifically were being weaponized. Black women, even more specifically, with like these like fake Black women, Black Lives Matter kinds of accounts, activist accounts that were obviously not real. And so like that, your slip of showing campaign on Black Twitter, I think that was a very important moment that eventually was catalyzed into people in the national media having to reconcile that social media had been weaponized to undermine the 2016 presidential election and elect Donald Trump. And their work was the catalyst for that. So that was a very important moment in helping us understand the stakes of what nefarious technologies and what tech companies who prioritize profit before people can do to modern democracies. Okay, so that was an important moment. I think the whistleblowers prior to Frances Haugen, you know, kind of maybe even starting with like, you know, Edward Snowden, let's say, were really important. You know, I thought when I saw, for example, the Cambridge Analytica, I saw a small Cambridge Analytica story in The Guardian. I was in Europe at the time that I saw it. It was before it became like a full-blown story. It was like maybe months before. Carol Cadwalader, who had been doing all this amazing work, you know, Olivia Salone at The Guardian. Again, these women journalists who were breaking these stories, right? And I thought that was very important because many of us understood our work being tied to that. Like, again, it was like some of these mainstream stories, when they hit, there was already a lot of evidence. And so like these things, like, again, help to like cohere
to piece it all together.
Yeah, it's like a national and international narrative. So then we could say, like, you know, I could really understand and talk about, listen, when social media gets weaponized, what happens is people then turn to search engines to fact check. That's why we have to talk about what happens in something like Google, because these things are connected, they're interconnected, or they go to YouTube. So I think those were really important, like, moments where people started to be like, oh my gosh. But again, if you look at how these things happened, it was when not the women of color. It was when men, mostly white men, you know, white women were out in front. Then everybody was like, oh my gosh, what? And, you know, I remember like writing a piece about the very same phenomena that I was talking about happens to Black girls and Latina girls and Asian girls in search, was the exact same thing mechanistically that happened to Hillary Clinton in her presidential campaign. Except when I was talking about girls of color, no one cared. And then when it happened to Hillary Clinton and it threw a presidential election, everyone was like, wait a minute, what is Google doing? And I was like, oh my gosh, it was like a head to desk. You know?
Have you seen the movie A Time to Kill?
Oh my God, so long ago.
It's got, I can't remember the actor's name, but his closing arguments, he's just like, there was these atrocities against a young Black girl, and he's just like, now imagine she's white. And the jury was fine.
Right. You see? So it's kind of been like that for many people, not just me, you know, narrating our work. And then it kind of like somehow it's like ahead of the curve, like all things. I feel like many times, but because of people who are forced into oppressive, marginal experiences in a society, always see things way before they become mainstream, right? And so it's like, this is why I'm always trying to say to funders, you should be listening to the people of color. You should be listening to the people who are most likely to be victimized by any set of technologies. Trust me, they already know. They know way before it's in the mainstream. And that's always true. I mean, there was nothing in Frances Haugen's testimony, for example, that we hadn't known for years. But, you know, she came in the package that then, you know, the world was prepared to differently hear. What's also instructive about that is that there was like, you know, $10 million was immediately poured into supporting Frances Haugen, going around and speaking to governments all over the world and being in the media and like, you know, articulating. And I always think about, well, what if that $10 million had been poured into the Black women who had been on the internet, who also, right? Because so, you know, we can just, it's instructive for funders and for us to understand like whose voices count in articulating. But those have been very important pivotal moments. And I think that, you know, the hard work, it's kind of like when the film The Social Dilemma came out, that did a lot of consciousness raising. But of course, you know, there were many, many, many people who were left out of that film. I know the filmmakers feel very deeply apologetic about that. And, you know, the solutions or the ideas, I mean, for me, I will say that my idea is not to have better tech. My ideas are to have better investments in people and not keep diverting resources away from communities and people who need repair and restoration into tech solutionism. But that has also been really pivotal because now, you know, people want to build better algorithms instead of building better societies.
So let's stay with misinformation. You mentioned the social dilemma. I know you were in conversation with Tristan Harris and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex recently, but so I want to start with mentioning, Barack Obama, and I'll give you a chance to take a drink of water because I know I have you talking.
Right, okay.
Barack Obama gave a talk recently about misinformation at that other large university in the Bay Area that will remain nameless because, I go to Berkeley. You sat down with Tristan and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex about the same topic. I think I mentioned I gave a talk about misinformation at the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science at my alma mater, the University of Buffalo, recently, which I was very excited about. And we have a talk by Mark Dirksen. So he is at the Center for African Strategic Studies. They're doing a talk on false and disinformation on the African content, how it's being weaponized. So can you talk about, because not everybody will maybe make that direct connection between what the book I keep holding up and misinformation. So can you make that connection for us and talk about, again, that effect on everyday people and why so many of these big voices, Harry and Meghan, Barack Obama, you, Tristan, are talking about this right now? Why is it so important?
Well, it's interesting because there has been a whole new field of mis and disinformation research that has emerged. And one of the things that I have, tried to remind us of is that disinformation is propaganda. And propaganda has been with us for a very, very, very long time. The concept of propaganda, but also the industry and the practices of propaganda. And I know this because I really understand advertising as truly its origin story is in the origin stories of propaganda. Okay, yes. So we have propaganda. My whole book, in fact, is really trying to show these early origin stories of propaganda against Black women and girls, against Black people, against African peoples that would create things like a rationale and justification for our enslavement, for the, for the occupation of indigenous lands. You have to actually invent whole ideologies and systems of implementing the kind of propaganda, racist propaganda that is needed to keep people enslaved for hundreds of years, right? So to justify the denial of rights, of human rights, right, or civil rights. So the origin stories of propaganda are old, and racist propaganda is part of the DNA of the United States and of the Americas. You cannot get away with. There's no way to deny that. And so to me, it's really important that we not get we invent disinformation and misinformation as a framework divorced from these other legacies and active machines that are well-funded. Because what's happened in the field of dis and misinformation is that, and of course, people in my own field in information science and librarianship have really been fixated on this too, is that somehow if the truth or the facts are visible, people will act upon the facts and the detailed information. But of course, we know that is absolutely not true. Okay, this is ludicrous. And we know that other arts like persuasion and influence, right, and power are actually what drive what people are willing to believe in. We know that disaffection, for example, people feeling that their quality of life is diminishing, that they're losing opportunity, that they can't afford to send their kids to college. Those are motivating factors for people to, let's say, vote for someone like Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. It's less about the facts of who he is. It's more about the emotions, the experiences that people have, their sense of place in power systems. So for me, I really tried to focus on that. I mean, we weren't using dis and misinformation when I was writing the book to the degree that we're using it now. I think we should be cautious about trying to carve out that there is one reality and one set of facts, and everybody must cohere around that, because I just don't think that is true. I think making systems of power and inequality visible and saying, how do we create more equality? How do we distribute power and resources so that people have a high quality of life, so that people have agency, so that people feel like whatever they were born to do on this earth, they can do, that people can feel unlimited and, love and appreciation and respect. That is actually more important as a project in life for me. And does everybody cohere around the same fact? And that if we do, somehow that's going to solve the problems. I'm not actually convinced of that, because none of that addresses power and harm. So I've been in places trying to say that. I mean, I have tried to share my thoughts with people like Barack Obama, President Obama, with people like the Duke and Duchess, with regulators, with senators, congresspeople, agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, and I think that I feel like I hear some of my words coming through some of those people. So I think that people are listening and trying to metabolize and, a lot of people's work and a lot of people's ideas and do some reframing. And I was there when President Obama gave that speech at that university at Stanford. And it's fine. I can say it.
It was incredible. It was incredible.
Yeah. And,
just in the wrong location, but it was incredible.
I know. I was at UCLA. There were many people that the president has been listening to, who have been advising him to have a deeper understanding of the issues and the stakes and the frameworks that need to be in the world. And I thought he did an excellent job, quite frankly, of narrating that. He's a great storyteller.
Exceptional.
He helped us get the point that, let's say me or somebody like Rashad Robinson at Color of Change, or maybe we might just come in a little too surgical on it, and we're not for everybody.
Yes.
President Obama, he said what needed to be said for people who needed to hear it.
I want to shift over to the op-ed you wrote with Rashad Robinson in just a second, but and we walked through regulation a little bit. We've talked about power, persuasion, and I'm thinking about industry right now with regards to the ability to sort of persuade and wield this level of power to a level that probably many people couldn't have imagined. The budgets of some of the companies in the United States far exceed those of many nations, many groups of nations. So I'd love to know how you think about collaborating with industry and how you simultaneously keep them accountable, and also to continue to work to make our world a better place for Black women, which I think raises the bar for everybody. But
I think so too. I mean, I do think that Black women are like the canaries in the coal mine. And I think we have, we should be listened to. I think we have a lot of insight, and, trust me, women like Virginia Eubanks, I heard her say this about her book, Automating Inequality. She said, the women that she interviewed who were on public assistance, who understood all the ways that the AI was constraining their ability to purchase food or, take care of their families, they were very clear, these systems, they're being tried out on us, but these are coming for everybody, right? So many of these systems are now being tried out on everybody. And you see that the algorithm can score and decide whether you go to college or not. You saw that deployed in the UK on middle-class kids in the UK, and how that blew up and was disastrous, right? And so, all these different kinds of projects that are happening, I think are, it's not just watching what happens to people of color. It's watching them with an eye toward how these ideas will get mainstreamed and harm everyone. So I don't know. I think that's for some reason, that's what I remember of the question you asked. You said a lot of things, and then you were also listen to Black women. I was yeah, let's just talk about that. Let's just talk about listening to Black women. I don't know. What okay, wait.
The first you part actually of the question was about how do you keep tech accountable, or industry accountable while and I don't know if partner is the right word, but how do you keep them accountable and also keep them as a partner?
Well, I mean, I don't think that probably most people see me as an industry partner. I mean, there are people who work in industry who I have great relationships with and I speak with, but I I don't have we don't take any tech money into our center at C2I2. And so we're not really research partners in any way. I'm not. And I think that there have been people in the center for sure, some of my colleagues who have gone to do work in industry and taken what they know. And I think that that's really valuable and important. And I think that people with knowledge should try to go to the epicenters of power in the tech sector and try to do the kind of reform work that needs to happen. I think in general, we need a massive reckoning and regulatory environment over these companies. I really don't think that a lot of individuals and good people working in companies can really do the systemic change that needs to happen. I think that we're talking about 7 of the 10 most well-capitalized companies on planet Earth are tech companies. They virtually have no regulation for the most part, with outside of something like GDPR. I think the regulatory regimes that get imposed have do not take a systems level approach. They're things that are about individuals in society being able to have particular kinds of rights in relationship to huge institutions and power structures, which is what these companies are. So I find that to be too narrow also and prescriptive. I think, we have to think about the harm. And, for me, my work is around how do we better assess the harm, the denial of opportunities, the denial of rights. And I'm talking about everything from ethnic cleansing and genocide that has happened to communities around the world. I'm talking about the people who didn't get into college. I'm talking about women who lost their jobs because some ex posted revenge porn or non-consensual pornography, or they're targeted with deep fakes. I'm talking about real repair. People who lose their lives, their livelihood, their family members, people who lose family members to suicide because they cannot handle the bullying and the other kinds of targeted harassment that happen. There is right now, no civil framework for suing for repair. We don't have digital civil rights in that way. We don't have enough case law on the books. We don't have enough litigation that's been successful for people to actually be restored. There's no transfers of wealth. There's when the fines hit the tech companies, they go into state coffers, right? They go into the bank, they go into the bank of the nation state. They don't go to the people who, it's very hard to sue for damages if you've been trolled on the internet and you've lost something very real in your life. So I think we have that. For me, that's where the work is. I'm really committed in the work that I do, through UCLA and with other universities, to helping to stand up a true digital civil rights agenda and framework. And I've been hosting meetings and generating convenings with people, lawyers, scholars, journalists, to think about how we can do that work, so that you will start to see more and more work emerge, I think, in the coming years around that. And that is incredibly important. To me, that's where the accountability lives, is when people have to be accountable financially and otherwise. And right now, there's no accountability measures. And that is, of course, with my work on the board of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, those are the kinds of things we think about all the time, because we are constantly attuned to people who are victimized in the tech sector. Individuals in trust and safety, committees and boards, in the tech companies, they have no teeth for the most part. They don't interact with product. They can't really influence the product. They're an afterthought. Even the policy people in companies are an afterthought to product people. And product people have no incentives to not harm, because guess what? We don't have laws. For example, if you're, let's say, hypothetically, you are the CEO of a pharmaceutical company that, let's say, didn't jack set prices on EpiPens.
Hypothetically. I'm
just saying, right? Or let's say your company profits in the billions off of something like, say, an opioid crisis. And you kill millions of people and destroy whole communities. In those cases, there is C-suite level accountability. You have to act. Maybe somebody's going to go to prison maybe there's going to be massive payouts. We saw this in the tobacco industry, for example,
Yes. Yep.
right? And the class action lawsuits against big tobacco. I think we need those kinds of models for the tech sector. This makes me wildly unpopular to people who work in the tech industry. But I will say that, listen, I tell my students, listen, what if you were in many other professions, you would have a higher degree of accountability. You would have codes of conduct. You might even have to have like insurance to protect you from malpractice, in certain kinds of industries. We don't have that in the tech industry. So we need different kinds of models on an industry that is so powerfully shaping our lives and truly implicated in life or death decisions. That to me is like, let's say that's one of my other green shoots that I'm working on cultivating. And that's a place where I think we need industry to stop and to get reoriented.
And I think that the lecture you attended by President Obama, I felt like he did a great job of walking us towards some of those things we need to think about, and then challenging the big brains in the room, like yourself, to start, and others, to start putting these things together and thinking about this. So I want to thank you, because you hit a number of questions that I don't even have to ask now. So that last one on tech accountability was from Matt Salganik, who's one of our founders, and you also touched on a couple questions related to GDPR and privacy and such that were asked by Taylor and Tina from Barry CSS. So
Can I add one little thing? Can I just add one little thing about
please, no, keep going. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Right.
Please.
So I just want to raise visibility for Ifeoma Ozoma, who is such an important person in the tech accountability space. I feel so honored to get to know her, and I'm hoping to work with her in the future more closely. She is a Black woman. She worked at Pinterest. She was someone who was also mistreated on the job as a Black woman working in the tech sector. Many Black women know that is a very difficult industry to work in, just being on the job. And she has almost single-handedly, with the help actually of other Black women, lawyers and lobbyists, to pass the Silence No More Act here in California. And I think it's on deck now to be passed in the state of Washington. And if we are doing our work and supporting her properly, all of us, that act will get passed in all 50 states. And that is a major tech worker rights act that basically does not allow the tech sector to have cover through the use of non-disclosure agreements, which is what they invoke to keep tech workers from coming forward to talk about dangerous things that they see on the job, because most tech workers have to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to work at those companies, and they last for years beyond their working at those companies, and they preclude them from being able to be whistleblowers or just to share out.
Most visitors to those tech companies, I know I've signed those just to go attend an event.
That's right. That's right. So in California now, those are illegal. And imagine what a difference that is going to make for tech workers to be able to object, to be conscientious objectors on the job to things that they are doing. And of course, we're seeing more and more tech workers at Microsoft, at Google, at Facebook, walking out, organizing, saying we refuse to put our labor in service of dangerous things, of autonomous weapons and, autonomous drones that, can kill people and all kinds of things. So I think I just want to shout her out, because Black woman doing the work, you know what I'm saying? Under supported, needs more support. Okay. So that kind of work in the tech accountability sector is so important. And of course, we know, I mean, I look at her, I look at Naniette, I look at so many people who have really, even Joy, Buolamwini, when she was a graduate student at MIT, taking on companies like Microsoft and Amazon and to bringing them to task with the great research that she and Naniette and Deb Raji did around gender shades and showing how facial recognition technologies don't recognize Black women's faces and how dangerous these are when they're implemented. Joy faced a lot of targeting by companies for, raising the alarm. So I just think that, we need to know that when these successes happen, first of all, that Black women are doing, and women of color, and all kinds of people are doing the work. It's not just Black women, obviously. Lots of people are doing lots of work, and lots of people are targeted and harmed behind the scenes for doing that work. And so let's get behind and support each other, because that's also part of the accountability work.
I'm struck by what you're mentioning with all these different names of women who are having such important influence with regards to tech, and how rarely we call them whistleblowers, Black women. So that it's a term that we don't get to use very often. Some of my master's work is actually on whistleblowers. You mentioned Edward Snowden. I also studied Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. So that's part of my work. So we have a question from a PhD student at Duke, and then we'll finish off with talking about Rashad and Elon Musk and the Just Tech platform. So this is an economics doctoral student at Duke, a friend of mine, Michelle. She's a Kennedy School alum like me, and she says, social science researchers often use digital data sources and research designs intended to determine causal relationships. So this year's Nobel Prize in Economics recognized contributions that improve causal inference in that field. Your work highlights that digital data sets themselves may be biased because algorithms influence the various digital footprints that make these data sets. What are some areas where you worry the most about drawing dangerous causal conclusions based on digital data sets?
Yeah, I love that question.
Michelle Blair, shout out.
Get it, Michelle. Well, we know, for example, I open the book with talking about technological redlining, and, Chris Gilliard really coined this, in talking about like educational technologies. He called it digital redlining. I think we have a lot to watch around these kinds of like the flattening of the concept of data and what is in data sets, and making assumptions about a particular type of neutrality or fairness in that data, that then gets, of course, implemented in ways that are profoundly discriminatory. And so, redlining is a great example of that, where data scientists will often take in data sets, let's say organized by zip code, and they'll look for patterns of failure, right, and of success. And of course, these are tied to other kinds of like profound structural racism, like in like segregated housing and like lack of loans and like, devaluation of property that Black people own, or, working class people own. So, working class people of color. So I worry all the time about like the lack of clarity that data scientists have when they're using different kinds of data sets to formulate opportunities or to foreclose opportunities. Mm-hmm. And this is also very difficult to study because many times we can't see the data sets, the corporate data sets. We don't know what they're collecting so much data on us. When we walk by their store in the mall, they know. When we like so many things that are biometrics, they're buying with the data brokers, the thousands of data brokers that are buying and selling and trading data from all kinds of different discrete data sets we wouldn't even think were ever being paired together, mm-hmm. right? Like our fitness tracker and, insurance companies. Like people don't actually think about those kinds of connections being made in data. So I, of course, am no fun at a cocktail party because this is all I ever want to talk about. It's just like
my kind of cocktail party.
I know. You have to come to my house because this is how we do it.
Done.
And I am encouraged that the Nobel Committee would even look at that kind of work and value it. I never think of the kind of work that I do or that we do in this field being like Nobel worthy, even though like so many people in our field should be getting that, because
yes,
it's really it's like blowing the whistle on climate change. We should listen to the people in this field who are talking about this because it will truly transform the world and the people who unfortunately are the makers of some of the most nefarious kinds of technologies. I mean, to me and we just pretty much spiral down when we get into these conversations because, these are people for whom their worldview tied to like things like eugenics and, long-termism, they actually think like if 100 million people were wiped off the face of the planet, like that would be a solution to things that they think, the way they frame problems. Like they have very Darwinistic, in many ways, worldviews about survival of the fittest. And, if all the poor people of color drop off, that's kind of better for the planet and for the world. I mean, it's like so sick. It makes me ill. And these are the people with unlimited resources who have no stake in it, who, or let's say the stake they have, they purely benefit from those ways of thinking. And so this is where, again, people entering the field should actually understand, I've taken on and, I just, places like the Center for Humane Tech, because I think that they are misoriented, in the world. When I see, people gather around certain kinds of politicians who also share these kinds of ideologies about the world, and the QAnon and like, far right, politicians. I mean, I think we should open our eyes and watch that. That is scary to me. And that's why we really should not be spending a lot of time thinking about making better algorithms. We should be looking at how power is reorganizing and how the tech sector is feeling that. And, Rob Reich in his new book, System Error, I heard him give an interview about this last year at a conference we were both at. And he said, I sat down with all of the players, all of the tech CEOs, because, he's like in the club with them and had access to them. And he was like, when you listen to them talk about the technocracy ruling the world, borderless states, they don't care about things like that. They're not invested in the nation state. They're not invested in communities. They're interested in the technocracy ruling because one, it's profitable and beneficial to them. But two, they think that concepts like democracy are really messy. He said he confronted many of these CEOs and he said, hey, what you're talking about is profoundly anti-democratic. And they were like, yeah, democracy is too messy and it takes too long. We're not interested in that. So, that is a wake-up call. And people need to really, like, for me, this is where I just feel like I am taking head on that this is what I am interested in, is the way in which the world is being reimagined for the most elite, the most powerful, who are not people who look like me and you, sis, to run it all at any cost. And our disposability is really like considered an externality.
So you mentioned access to unlimited resources in there. And I think that's a great pivot to your op-ed with Rashad about Twitter and Elon Musk. So can you talk to me about how that came about, the two of you writing this piece and what's come of it?
Yeah, I really got to know Rashad when we were both on the Aspen Commission on Information Disorder, which is also how we got to know Prince Harry, because he was also on that. And he is well, that's for drinks. So, it was an interesting experience. And Rashad and I found ourselves oftentimes just like, what is happening on some of the, let's say latitude that maybe some of our colleagues wanted to afford to industry. And that truly kind of like the civil rights and racial justice frameworks have to drive how we think about what's happening in the tech sector, because the tech sector, it unto itself is a racial justice issue in the way it employs and doesn't employ people, in what it designs and what it deploys on publics with no oversight. I mean, in its gross contribution to global economic inequality. I mean, we could just go on. So when Elon announced he was going to buy Twitter, this was before his Bitcoin tanked, Rashad and I were like, oh, everyone's really whipped about Elon, but see, how different is Elon from anybody else in the big scheme of things? And like, yeah, okay, maybe he's not exactly like Jack, but is he really that different, from like the cadre of people who run the tech sector? And so we wrote this op-ed for the LA Times to really say, like, what is important is not which tech bro is in the CEO driver's seat. What is important is how people will be defended against the products that come out of the sector. How will we orient our societies in relationship to this ungovernable sector? Who will think about and prioritize people? You could call them users, but really it's like, what about, we didn't give the title to the LA Times, they picked the title, but truly, how will we prioritize people and not the industry? Like how do we shift the conversation? And he's awesome to write with. I was like, Rashad, let's just like, can we do this thing in 24 hours? And we did. And so it doesn't say everything because you can only do so much in 800 words. But again, we're just trying to point the conversation in a different direction. There is no utopia of where Twitter is great if Elon isn't in charge. But of course, Elon being in charge, ready to re-platform Nazis is not helpful. So of course, we don't want that. But we also, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that if only, some other person were at the helm, it would somehow magically be better.
So before we head into the final question about your path to the professoriate, I want to circle back around to Just Tech.
Yes.
So I have to ask you about it. So we have Mike Miller, who's coming in to speak about Just Tech during week 1. I think that's around the time when they're going to be announcing who their first round of fellows are, which is great. So I want to talk about the superheroes you're working with over there. So if I did my draft academic fantasy team, it's Alondra, it's Timnit, it's Ruha, it's you. And you announced this in March. And we did get Brandeis Marshall this summer, so Brandeis is coming to speak. There are a few other people who have emails from you who have not said yes yet, so Latanya, Joy, Meredith, Desmond, but we'll keep emailing them. I digress. So I want to know what it's like being in the room or in the Zoom with all these other incredible academic Jedis. So I'm in awe of this advisory board. So what does that do for your soul? What is that like?
Probably one of the top 5 meetings of my career was sitting on a Zoom. I was so jealous because they were all together in person in New York, and why was I in LA? I don't even know, something I had to be in LA for. So I had to Zoom in. So I was super sick about missing all of it in person. But yeah, listen, at no other time in my life has anybody convened all of the Black people who are like, at the time too, I don't even think I had tenure yet. I think I was just around going up for tenure. And so it's like a couple years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, it was like, let us put you all in a room and tell us what would have made a difference for you in your careers. Like, what if there were a fellowship or there was support, what would it look like? What would it feel like? How would it work? No one's ever asked Black people what their dreams are, especially in academia. What are your dreams and how would you want to see them realized?
I don't know what I would do if someone asked me that. I would just stand there.
We were tripping. Can you imagine? We were all tripping. Trust.
I was like, where's Ashton Kutcher? Somebody's punking me. Like,
is this for real? Are you guys for real? So, it opened up a magnificent conversation. And then there were a series of like one-on-one follow-ups that were done with us to just like drill down more. And there were things like that, of course, like came out. Like I said, well, if you win a big fellowship, let's say you win like, first of all, winning a big academic fellowship, like a Carnegie or a MacArthur, is pretty much completely out of your hands. You don't apply for those things. Other people nominate you, you get vetted, you don't really even know how it happens. It's not really like you can just like apply for a thing and put your best foot forward. So those things are, it's like playing the numbers. I mean, you're not going to get it. you're in the game, but you're not going to probably win. Okay. So that's what those kinds of big fellowships are. They don't typically go to us.
We got ready at a baby this year. Carnegie.
Oh my God. I know.
And was it Rashawn Ray? I think is in there too. It's a good year for people interested in tech who are Black.
Exactly. It's really a good year. And it's been a good couple of years. And so, we asked all these questions, and we were asked these questions. We said things like, I said, my first year as an assistant professor, I had like a baby, and it was hard for me to travel and go to, like, I have my son in my like last year, basically, of my PhD program. And I said, I needed him to travel with me because I was breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. And guess what? And as he got older and we were, he was attached, it would have been so much easier for me to do work in like the first 3 years of his life if he could have traveled with me and been incorporated into what I was doing. But, and it was a really big hardship because like the university's not going to pay for an extra plane ticket, or they're not going to pay for my husband to come, or my mother-in-law to come to help me with the baby. You see what I'm saying? Because that's not in the framework of what a university will pay for. Mm-hmm. But I needed that. And that is like, I couldn't afford it. I like made like hardly anything, as relatively speaking, as an assistant professor. So like that would have made a huge difference in the early days. There were times where like I said, I didn't have like enough research money, and that would have helped. But there were also things like, if someone got sick in my family and I just needed extra money and I needed to help, because that was a emotional, mental burden, a physical burden sometimes that I needed to attend to, and I needed support. Mm-hmm. Like everybody had these stories. Everybody had their own version of these things. And, maybe you had a domestic partner that wasn't legally recognized in the state where you lived in, and you needed like to pay, for insurance for that. Like who knows? Like there's all kinds of things. People needed to get student loans down off their backs, like lots of things. So we got to sit in a room and dream up and just tell our truth about how hard it is, what we need support, where we really need support, where we need unrestricted support. Mm. And go have fun. Right. And a little guy that I was just talking about was a baby who's 11 now.
Is he gonna come say hi?
You gonna come say hi to the folks on the
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, all right. So that's what that Just Tech fellowship was like, getting to dream it up. Of course, Alondra Nelson at the helm, Mike Miller, their whole teams have been amazing. I do happen to know who's getting, I can't say anything, I'm sworn to secrecy, but I will tell you, people who have made such contributions, who are amazing. And it's thrilling to see people supported. And I think like, where's the model where everybody gets supported? You know what I mean? In like a non-competitive way, because so many people are doing brilliant work. There were hundreds of people who applied for this fellowship, and truly, I'm sure all of them were worthy. And so it would be amazing to see like, how could something like this grow and be like truly transformative? Can you imagine if like thousands of people every year got supported like this, what a difference it would make? So I think Just Tech is the seed for that. And I'm really proud of having been a part of that group who could dream it up. And I'm really thrilled for the people who are going to be announced.
So let's end with your path to the professoriate. So I'd love to know when you knew you wanted to do the kind of research that you do, when you knew what you wanted to study, and just I shudder a little bit when I say when you decided you wanted to live a life of the mind. When did those things hit you, and how did you get there?
It's funny because, I knew I wanted to be a professor when I was about 20 years old. And that was because I had Black professors. And my Black professors at Fresno State were brilliant teachers. brilliant. The CSU, the California State University System, has some of the most brilliant scholars in the world, and many of them are so deeply committed to teaching that they don't want to be in a research one environment because they love students. And I had those kinds of professors, Black professors, and I'd never had a Black teacher in my entire life until I went to college.
Wow.
Which is shameful. And I never experienced Black people with PhDs who were so brilliant and so inspiring, and who I learned so much from. And they became like, godparents and second parents to me, honestly. And I knew then I wanted to be like them. But I had, these other considerations. By the time I was finishing undergrad, I wanted to go to Berkeley and get my PhD. And I had been a, student activist, and I wasn't kind of like, I didn't have my shit together to go to get a PhD yet because I'd been doing all this activism. And so I went to San Jose State to get a master's, and I was going to then apply into Berkeley. I was going to go work with Harry Edwards in the sociology department. He and I already had I was going to finish at San Jose, and I was going to transfer and work with Harry at Professor Edwards. And, then my parents really became truly disabled when I was working on my master's degree, and they couldn't work. And I felt like I had to work and support them. And, it was really interesting. And this is a cautionary tale, I think, about those of us who are in institutions supporting students and for students themselves. I was a first-gen student. My parents, didn't go to four-year universities and graduate. And I had done, for example, everything I needed to do within a few years of starting at San Jose State and working full-time. And I did all the requirements for my master's degree at San Jose State. But I never applied for graduation. I didn't know you were supposed to fill out a piece of paper in order to graduate. I had no idea because I was working full time trying to support my parents. And then I didn't get the degree. And I actually, even up until a few months ago, was still petitioning San Jose State and saying, since my parents have died, and I was petitioning them and saying, you should really let me have my degree, because it was the last thing deeply sentimental to me. And, they won't give it to me. So I don't know. They said it's been more than 10 years. So I can't have it. I don't know. It's weird. So there's a failure. It's a failure of institutions. We have to act. This is before the internet and digital record and database driven records, hardcore. So I learned something about that. I learned I had a dream. I was on a path. I got off that path to attend to other things and people and that was the right thing to do. And so I went back and, did another master's degree so that I could get into a PhD program when I was 38. And I did my PhD. I don't want to freak people out because I did my PhD in 3 years because I'm a triple type A Capricorn. And I was older. And so I just ground it out, you know what I mean, as fast as I could. But I finished my PhD when I was 41. And I had a baby in the middle of it, and I was a stepmom, and I was married, and I had, again, I lost my parents, on that journey. And so I just think it's that part too is really important, because I'm thank God I didn't get my PhD when I was 24 or 25, started then, because what did I know? I mean, not that people who do that don't know a lot, but I'm so much better a contributor for embracing the whole of my journey. The corporate America part, the burying my parents part, the going back in a way that's kind of humiliating, it's hard to go back to grad school when you're older than all the other people in your class, and actually the same age as most of your professors, and maybe you hang out with them outside of work because you're actually all the same age. And
I went to the staff association to look for people my age, the Black Staff Association.
Okay, all right. You're tracking. This is exactly what happened. It's hard, because you're thinking wow, if I had done it when I was young, like they did, I'd be a full professor now at 40, like they are. And instead I'm in my second year of a PhD program, and that is hard. And So I share that part too, because listen, it's never too late to be whoever you want to be and to do whatever you want to do. And actually, the things that are in you to do must be done. So wherever you are, just like the gut feelings, that was like my research, the gut feelings, the like instincts, the like, I'm going to do it, even if it's hard, I'm going to sacrifice because it will fulfill me. Those are the things to do. And I'm right now actively, like, my husband is reinventing and starting a new career. And, you know, it's like a parallel. He's having like the same parallel experience where he's like, oh my God, I'm like, you know, this X age and I should be, and I'm like, oh my God, you're going to blow up in this career because you've had all these other experiences that are informing it. You're so already far ahead, you know, from that. So that's kind of how my journey happened. And it was messy and it was like full of like, you know, like mistakes and hardship and joy and laughter and, you know, all the things. And I just think there is no way. I think the way you do it is your way.
And you're free.
And then you're free. And I'm like, I get up every day. I love my life. I mean, there's no greater joy. This, like, getting to sit here and talk to you for a couple hours. Oh my gosh, who doesn't want to do that all day?
So much fun.
Oh my gosh, I feel so lucky that this is my occupation, and I'm grateful that you made a space to hear anything I had to say.
And with that, we'll close our time together. Thank you so much, Professor Noble, for your time, for your brilliance, for what you give to women who look like me and just everyone. It's been a joy to chat with you. I'm
so proud of everything you're doing, and, you know, your leadership, and you're making the space for voices. Just, you know, I'm just want to say personally to you, thank you for inviting me and for coming and standing in the line for a minute, you know, so we could meet. Yes. And, you know, I just wish you and, you know, all of the participants in this program, you know, so much strength and joy and happiness in this project. And I'm here. I'm on the internet and I'm available. I'm around. Okay.
And I found you. So yes, it's true, people.
I'll get our friends to, I'll try to get them, ping them to respond to the emails too.
Yes. Okay. And now that I got you, not letting go. Thank you so much.
Better not. Okay.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.